The following episode can be viewed on the YouTube channel Bernie or Bust Television. Bernie or Bust, it's not just a clever slogan. Kathy Copeland Padden. You should all be following Kathy Copeland Padden. You should be hitting this button on your Medium page. Medium.com. Way back in 2015, when we were all a bit younger and maybe a tad less jaded, a philosophy shared by millions was given a name and a home base. Bernie or Bust. Revolt against Plutocracy is the parent organization of Bernie or Bust. Co-founded by Victor Tiffany and Patrick Walker, Bernie or Bust took on a life of its own last time, but it's been on the QT this time, and so Kathy is helping us to get the word out this time. She makes the point that the reason it caught fire last time is because of the corruption in the Democratic National Committee. And so that's what we're going to remind you of this time. It's just as corrupt this time. Bernie or Bust. Remember, we were going to write Bernie in or vote third party if the DNC did us wrong. And we did. But in retrospect, the write-in option was sorely lacking punch in the face of individual state election laws. True. And can anyone recall how the Hillbots equated us with 3-year-olds holding their breath until their demands were met? Good times. But we soldiered on. Bernie may have lost, but hey, Clinton didn't win. Always look for that silver lining. Kathy isn't mentioning it, but in the Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, the reason Clinton didn't win is because many of Bernie's supporters voted directly for Donald Trump. And statistically, we can prove that that alone is why Hillary didn't win. But hey, Clinton didn't win. Always look for that silver lining. I admit I was a bit naive in the aftermath of the 2016 election and have a terrible habit of giving people far more credit than they deserve. So I harbored hope that the DNC and the Dem rank and file would heed the hard lessons they should have learned from the unparalleled foobar they created. The corruption exposed during the Democratic primaries was hardly the work of criminal masterminds, and if you read the WikiLeaks emails instead of illogically screaming about Russia, it's crystal clear what happened and who was behind it. The Moscow stole it narrative is a fancy version of the dog ate my homework for a dismal, dollar-drenched Democratic Party that abandoned the working class and the causes of peace, social justice, and environmental sustainability long ago. Paul Street. Thank you, Paul Street. The Democratic Party asserts that, as a private corporation, they are not bound by their own charter. They reserve the right to handpick the candidate of their, meaning the plutocracy's, choosing. In a nutshell, Democrats freely admit their primary process is just political theater, and yet they never hesitate to strong-arm both Green New Deal Democrats and independent progressives. The will of the people is very far down on the DNC list of concerns. They expect voters, all voters, not just their party members, to content themselves with whatever talking head neoliberal corporatists they throw our way. The nicest thing they say when we refuse to comply with vote blue no matter who is that we're too policy-oriented. Like that's even a thing. The most amazing aspect of this behavior is that establishment Dems issue their demands without a hint of irony. Self-awareness isn't their strong suit. Bernie or Busters were considered beneath contempt by limousine libs. The pantsuit brigade even told us point blank they didn't need our stinking votes to win the election, yet still blame us for Hilsey's loss to a gelatinous orange turd. Here is a message I got from Darren Oakes in this wonderful time that she's reminiscing about. And you are a perfect example of a willfully ignorant propaganda-spewing troll. And take your responsibility for Trump. That's all on you and your ilk. There was nothing wrong with the Democratic Party until Sanders ran his fucking mouth. You don't deserve our party. Get the fuck out. We don't need weak-minded conspiracy theorists in it anyway, you pathetic, lying piece of shit. I responded, it's your bed. I'm going to show this to the prominent Dem Enter folks to let them know that there really is no hope in trying to work with corrupt rank-and-file diehard Dem cheerleaders. Good, you fuck-twit. Let your friends know that the Democratic Party isn't going to roll over and let trash like you take it over. The Dems are a lost cause. There is no soul there. So that's the attitude that she was talking about from the diehard Democrats. Hypocrisy! Thy name is Democrat. And ever since then, all we've heard is Russian, Putin, Russia, in the biggest display of politically induced mass hysteria since the last Red Scare in the late 40s, early 50s. A little golden book. Everyone I disagree with is a mindless spot or deplorable white trash. A child's guide to online political discussion. Not surprisingly, in the wake of 2016's shameful clusterfuck, the Bernie or Bust movement grew exponentially. I predict that it's going to happen again. Witnessing the blatant corruption of the Democratic Party during the primaries and beyond opened millions of sleepy eyes. It's interesting to note the differences between the progressive Bernie or Bust philosophy and the establishment Democrat vote blue no matter who battle cry. The former is a statement of intent, stressing the autonomy of independent voters, while the latter is a presumptuous admonition to vote for whatever neoliberal corporate puppet the DNC thrusts upon us, whether we are party members or not. Nope, not happening. Of all the lessons the DNC refused to heed post-2016, their belief that they are entitled to anyone's vote who's not a card-carrying Republican is the most mind-bogglingly arrogant and self-defeating. I feel like a broken record here, but rejecting the GOP does not in any way imply affinity with the Democratic Party. Far from it. Establishment Dems have a hard time grasping that over 40% of the electorate hold nothing but contempt for both parties. Why? Because most independents have known for years that the only real difference between the two is gay wedding cake. For example, hair-sniffing Joe openly stated he'd happily pick a GOP running mate and advise millions of concerned environmentalists to take their anti-fracking votes elsewhere. He's combative, elitist, and as articulate as Grandpa Simpson, only a lot less funny. Yet this is the best the establishment Dems have to offer. This is why we need to pledge Bernie or bust. The Democratic Party is not entitled to our support and certainly not our votes, especially when the Dems provide Trump with far more assistance than resistance. Iran war. Ding, ding, ding. Declaring ourselves Bernie or bust is the simplest way to drive the point home. The neoliberal assertion that Bernie or bust is a movement born of privilege proves conclusively just how hopelessly clueless they really are. Establishment Dems fail to understand how many of us simply cannot afford another administration courtesy of the evil two-headed monster called plutocracy. Almost half the country is ill-equipped to deal with a $400 emergency, even while working 2 or 3 jobs. 40,000 people die annually because, simply put, we value corporate profits over human life. The most vulnerable among us are literally having the food taken from their mouths and joining the ranks of the homeless in droves. Then the system responsible for their diminished circumstances blames the victim by outlawing homelessness. Pure evil. This is why we are Bernie or bust. Not necessarily because we personally are hardest hit by government-sanctioned genocide, yet, but because we believe no one should be doomed to an austerity-driven death. A good example of that is people who can't afford their insulin and they ration it and then they die as a result. If we don't commit to looking out for each other, even if you got yours, and this is the point I made to the people who are supporting Joe Biden in the Democratic primaries. If we don't commit to looking out for each other, even if you got yours, this country will deservedly go the way of Imperial Rome. And Neo-Lib Dems, Repeating vote blue no matter who like a mantra while also declaring yourself never Bernie perfectly sums up why you suck. Listen to yourselves and realize that solidarity and subjugation are two very different animals. Okay, so let's review. Our lesson plan was to diss Joe's record, diss Elizabeth's health care plan, contrast Bernie and Elizabeth in terms of the kind of support they can muster to actually bring about the change that needs to happen, and then why we should be Bernie or bust, because this will give us the leverage to insist that Bernie gets the nomination in the primaries. As I've said before, it will be much easier for Bernie to defeat Trump in the general election than to unrig the system that has kept insurgent populists out of the DNC for over 100 years. I was remembering Hubert Humphrey and how the party bosses gave him the nomination, the Democratic nomination, and he hadn't won any primaries. That's the kind of system we've had so far with the Democrats. They pretend that it's democratic, but it is in no way democratic. It hasn't been for a long time. And for us to get our Democratic candidate through their rigged system, we're going to need to use leverage. And Bernie or bust is that leverage. If you're interested, there's still a Bernie or bust pledge out there somewhere, even though we're not even urging people to sign it. But most of all, share the idea that you will, under no circumstances, vote for a corporate Democrat, whether that be Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, or Elizabeth Warren, in the general election, no matter who. The preceding episode can be viewed on the YouTube channel Bernie or Bust Television.